Well, reports this morning in Europe say that French President Emanual Macron, along with his husband, is in hiding in a bunker in Paris right now. Why? Well, thousands of French farmers have brought Paris to a standstill, taking over the heart of the nation's capital. Of course, police are arresting farmers. As you can see here, they've thousands of tractors at the Champs-Élysées. Here is arrests happening, of course. And now there are incredible amounts of demand for Macron to resign. As you can see here, watch. Well, Professor Richard Werner is the author of Princes of the Yen, Japan's Central Bankers and the Transformation of the Economy. One of the smartest economist in the world is joining us right now to talk more about this. Professor, great to have you back here on the show. So the pleasure is all ours, of course. When you see happening right now with these thousands of farmers, like when in the West, we see these things unfolding on social media, we're like, oh, this is probably like an isolated incident, no big deal. But this seems to be a very big deal to the Emmanuel Macron government, and it's reverberating across Europe. Am I reading this wrong?
Yes, it is. In many ways, the farmers have been quite impactful in this case. And it looks like, at least partly, the Macron government has given in and has stated that they will now vote against the proposed international trade deal between the EU and Mercosur, the four Latin American countries, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay. I mean, this trade deal has been in the pipeline for a quarter century, really, but it's come to a head. Ursula von der Leyen, the Commissar, the President of the European Commission, which has essentially dictatorial powers over the EU. That's just the governance structure that they created. Has signed this a while back, and now it needs to be passed by a majority vote. They've got this new qualified majority voting system. So one country like France blocking it is not going to stop it. And that seems to be where we are, that there's a sort of proportionality by population, and it seems to be that the case that enough countries and with enough people are backing it, including Germany, Spain, and so France opposing it. Macron saying, "Okay, I'm going to back the farmers now on this one." Seems to be too little, too late. But we have to see, because it's not a given what will happen at that vote. And obviously, if the farmers, and that's why the farmers are still fighting here, if they can make their voice heard in the media in Europe, there's a chance it may either be postponed or modified again. Why are they against this? What is this about? Well, it's a free trade agreement. And of course, these Latin American countries, Brazil is very large, Argentina, very large agricultural sector. The fear is that the agricultural products from there will undercut European farmers and essentially drive them out of business. And so they don't want this deal. There's some particular clauses in there at the moment, namely, should this agreement result in European prices falling by more than 8%, then governments can step in and do something and sort of slightly put this on hold. And the farmers and France now is saying, okay, we want to change this to 5%, should be the pain threshold, should prices drop. So that's the fear that, prices will drop. And of course, farmers don't really have huge profit margins as it is. And then various costs, very high energy costs in particular, and various, government, EU, burdens on farmers have been stepped up dramatically in the last 15 years under, climate and various other excuses. So they are quite squeezed, and you can see why they're doing this. And of course, you can say, well, but free trade is good, and we should allow the cheap products to come in. Farming is very essential. And if a country or a region doesn't have, autarkic supplies from their own sources, then of course you are at risk of being blackmailed, or just, essentially, if there's an embargo, if there's disruption in trade, or may it be due to various other things, whether some environmental problem, climate catastrophe, well,
Right.
let's say some realistic one like a volcano eruption, or war. And if you don't have your own farmers anymore, then you're in dire straits. So I think it makes sense to actually treat your farmers well.
Imagine that, and not have their entire herds culled. I mean, that's what we saw, happening, of course, in the Netherlands. We had a tax issue, of course, in Germany with their farmers, but across the Netherlands, across Denmark. And now with the French, of course, one of the pieces of this was having their cow herds culled because of lumpy skin disease. That's a piece of this as well. We saw it happening in Canada as well, killing ostrich farms, and they're going after multiple farms now. And they're centralizing this control. They really don't want them to have cows. They really don't want them to have this farmland like we saw in the Netherlands. They want to get rid of these farmlands, create these 15-minute cities, right? I mean, turn this farmland into small little cities. You eat bugs, eat fake processed food, don't eat actual real meat, and they're attacking the very sustenance that provides the food for all of these people. I mean, it's just deeply disturbing. I remember I was in Berlin during the protests there, and the farmers, were saying, without us, this country collapses in Germany. Without us, you can't. We provide food for our regions, our counties. They rely on the butchers, all of these people. Without our meat, without our food, without our chickens, Germany would collapse.
Exactly. And of course, and that's true. And it's a truth that the leadership knows. And that's where you really start to wonder, potentially that is the aim. I mean, a lot of the policies taken in Europe, Germany particularly, but EU in general, have been so self-destructive on every count, so obviously self-destructive, that it's very hard to just say, oh, we didn't know, we didn't expect this to be this bad. I mean, Germany, the economy is collapsing, is really in dire straits. Other European economies are not much better. And so, this all adds up to really policy-imposed, self-imposed disaster upon disaster. And of course, farming really goes to the basics. If you can't feed your people. We just had the news yesterday that an elderly lady in Germany died because the heating was, it's pretty cold now, snow, minus temperatures, and there was a blackout of 30,000 households in Berlin. You mentioned you were in Berlin. Why was that? Because some climate and Antifa radical activists had actually blasted some electric supply grid in Berlin. So it was essentially a terrorist attack. But also the Berlin government didn't do anything about it. Foreign migrants that were in various places, they were taken care of, but locals, they just were left to freeze to death, like this lady.
So when Germany has a record of when people blow up their things, whether it's a Nord Stream pipeline or a power grid that wreaks havoc on 45,000 people, 45,000 homes, and people are without power for 5 days in Berlin. Germany doesn't do anything about it. Of course, they also shut down their own nuclear power plants as well,
exactly.
So it's not surprising.
Precisely, as you say. So these are things that authorities have allowed to happen or have actually actively supported these destructive policies, and it goes across, the economy, energy, and food supply is a key pillar. And we see the same thing. So it is a very concerning pattern, and it's definitely time for Europeans and others, just to actually take notice and say, well, we have to stop this, because, when leadership and governments do not protect their people and the basics, and of course there's the whole other issue of borders, lack of border protection, I mean, it just goes on, then the governments are not actually legitimate, and something has to be done. policies have to be changed because things will continue to deteriorate at the moment. That's where we are at the moment.
What about in the UK? I mentioned off the top, of course, the UK
Yes.
also lining up now tractors in solidarity with the French. You see the Canadian farmers, or they really led the charge, of course, on the trucker convoy. They said, "We stand with you." Where do you think things go next?
Yes. Well, first on the UK, of course, they also have their indigenous issue, the farmers, and that is, I mean, it's the same across the EU. They're being attacked essentially by their own government. And then each government has their own nuance of how they're going to make them suffer. In the UK, it's actually another version of the Dutch expropriation policy via really high inheritance tax. Now, that's an old trick. Governments have used this in many countries throughout history. If a government wants to own something that is privately owned, it can always suddenly impose huge taxes, and then you have to hand over whatever it is. There's been done, whether, Russia's done this with some foreign, gas companies, but, the West has done it, and the UK is now doing it to their own farmers. So because farmland, land prices are in general quite high in the UK, but, farmers aren't rich. They have to live off the land and work the land. But when they die and they own the land, the inheritance tax is going to be raised so much they have to sell the land. It's gone. And that's pretty evil. A lot of people are really against that, not just the farmers, but it looks like they're going ahead. So the farmers, of course, have an axe to grind. They were also out today protesting in Oxford, and it's very understandable. But unfortunately, and I think, people should show their opinion and express their opinion and their resistance against this. But perhaps we need a bit more of that because they're just steamrolling ahead with all these destructive policies.
Well, it turns out every bit of clarity that you feel in your life actually begins at the mitochondrial level, the tiny power plants in your cells. And when they weaken, your thinking actually slows down, your energy drops, and even simple tasks feel altogether harder. This is why researchers are so interested in methylene blue. Doctors have used it for more than a century to treat malaria, blood poisoning, cyanide exposure. And in recent years, scientists have discovered something even more interesting about it. In small, controlled doses, methylene blue can actually support healthy mitochondrial energy production, especially in the brain. And Dr. Anna Yaroslavsky from the University of Massachusetts calls it a cellular reboot because it helps the brain produce cleaner, more efficient energy. In 2025, the hype gained traction, actually, and people now using methylene blue to support mental clarity, sharper thinking, healthy aging without relying on stimulants. But purity actually matters, and many products online are aquarium-grade blue dyes, unregulated powders that are not meant for human use. Many of them even come from China. Well, the wellness company's Recharge is in a league of its own, totally in a league of its own. It's a pharmaceutical-grade methylene blue. It's paired with PQQ and NAD, which is the ultimate brain hack hybrid. So get 10% off plus free shipping. Head over to twc.health/redacted and use the code redacted. I'll get you out of here on this, Professor. How bad is it in Europe? I mean, it's one thing to be kind of hyperbolic about it. You see blackouts across Germany into a recession, factories closing. You see Friedrich Merz saying we're going to conscript young men to go to war against Russia. You're seeing this, of course, with these insane leaders right now across Europe. It's one thing to be a little hyperbolic and say it's really bad in Europe, but is it really bad in Europe?
The economic statistics are dire. They're really dire. Germany is in the third year of economic contraction. That's the data. And that's the first time since 1933 that there's been such a long recession, 3 years consecutively of contracting GDP, the national income shrinking year after year. And that's despite the government turning around saying, okay, we're going to have huge government spending on military, which is basically quite wasteful spending. And so that's pretty bad. The number of bankruptcies is at multi-decade highs. But other countries don't look much better. France doesn't look great. Austria doesn't look great. And of course, on top of that, we have the pending problem of, below the surface trouble in the banking system, because the ECB have been engineering this big asset bubble in the property markets. The usual trick, they did this first in Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Greece in the periphery, and now after that they did it in Germany. That peaked in 2022, and so the banks are now quite exposed. We see already the occasional story about banks being a bit in trouble, forced to merge. Bank mergers have increased, but that's brewing below the surface. And of course, the economy getting worse will mean that at some stage this also comes to a tipping point, and then we have a big banking crisis on top. But these are just the economic factors. Then you've got and the fundamentals we mentioned, energy, no change there, despite the obvious desperate need to change things here. It's still energy costs high. And then the EU, on top of that, stepping up various new demands on climate policies. The latest that has just come into effect, actually, just a week ago, is the new. It's got a fanciful, brand new acronym. There's just so many in Brussels. It's essentially a CO2 tax on imports, but it's structured in such a cumbersome fashion. The document is 3,000 pages, but every firm in Europe, in the EU, has to read this document, because Europe used to be a very open international place. So a lot of companies, of course, are importing things and exporting things all the time. That's really been the life flow in Europe. But now every company that imports has to check and make sure that the various brand new CO2 tariffs are being applied. And this is such a complex 1,600-page register of what is applied, how and when and where, for which type and component and product. And these small firms have to do that. So essentially you need now full-time staff looking into this. It's going to drive so many more companies out of business, as if we needed this. But it's just really symptomatic of how the EU continues to really hurt and damage the economy. So it is pretty bad. And then, of course, as you mentioned, we've got the war situation, and the Europeans being apparently, at least the leadership, being quite keen to continue this war. The population in all the countries, they don't want war. Nobody wants war. And so one could really seize this opportunity with President Trump saying, okay, let's end this. Europe could help. And that definitely would make a difference to actually come to an agreement and end this war, and governments could focus on turning around their really bad economies. But it seems to be the other way around. They're all afraid to focus on their domestic economies. They'd rather focus on international issues and beat the drums. We need to raise more money for Ukraine and step up warfare. It is very destructive. And so it is a pretty bad situation. It's almost any count and sector, things are getting worse.
Yeah. Well, you're in a country right now where Viktor Orban, I think this morning, said, hey, we figured it out. We closed our border. We don't have the types of crimes, the types of problems that all of these other European countries have. Pay attention to what we're doing here in Hungary. Professor, great to see you. Thank you always for enlightening us, educating us. And, I thought maybe you're going to talk me off the ledge a little bit about Europe's dire situation, but no, I'm still on that ledge. I'm still on the ledge looking over. It's an abyss right now.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Professor, thank you so much for staying up late with us there in Hungary. We really appreciate it.
No, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much.